Let me ask you a question. Is there anything that, well, let me see. What are two or three things, not even anything, because I know you're going to have an answer for this. What are two or three things that you think today's wrestling is missing that would make it much better that worked either in your day when you were WCW or growing up as a fan?
I know it. God, I keep harping on the same thing, but we're seeing it happen right before our eyes. If you go back and look at WWE story, look at Roman Reigns storyline a year ago, 18 months ago. It was all right. He's getting a push. Everybody's watching it. You know, it's kind of getting, it's there. Whether you get with it or not, it's going to be there. So you get with it eventually, whether you start out that way or not. And then all of a sudden comes this bloodline storyline as that whole Roman Reigns arc has been progressing, and it just takes off. Here's what I hope. Let me start out with, I wish I would have had as much knowledge because of what I've read and what I've done and who I've learned from since I got out of wrestling.
Right.
I wish I had a fraction of that knowledge back when I was actually writing stories for wrestling in the 90s, because they would have been much better. They wouldn't have all worked. Sometimes they just don't. But instead of one story out of 10 or one story out of 20, or in the case of an NWO or now Bloodline or some story that just sticks with you for, the mega powers with Hogan and Savage, for an example, there are storylines that stick with you. And all of those storylines have several things in common. The storylines progress in a logical, believable manner. They're episodic in a compelling way, which means the story builds each and every week. The characters within that story evolve each and every week along with that story. What we're seeing is a perfect textbook example of how to take not basic, it is complex, traditional storytelling structure and finding a way, and this is the magic part, but this is the difficult part, finding a way to take that very established structure and modify it to fit the expectation of a wrestling audience. Meaning there's certain things you can't do in a wrestling show that you can do in a scripted entertainment environment in terms of storytelling because of the nature. One's a narrative, the other's action, right? So you've got to find a way to take what works in those traditional structures and apply it to wrestling. That's the one thing that I believe, and I've been saying this now for years, especially about AEW, because I've been very outspoken about being a dirt sheet booker and booking for the internet versus booking for a television audience. But here's what I hope, man. I hope that this story is getting such a great reaction that it forces two people in particular to go, if I'm Triple H, I'm hoping I'm saying to myself, whatever we did, it worked. Now let's find out why it worked. What were the beats along the way? How did that arc go? Analyze your success so that you can repeat it. And if I'm Tony Khan, I'm looking at that storyline in WWE Bloodline, and I've got all the money in the world. I'm going to find someone who understands traditional, disciplined storylines and character evolution, and I'm going to put that person under contract.
Well, he's surrounded by a lot of people that could help him do that, and it's not being done.
Maybe. Who understands traditional storytelling that's surrounded, and maybe someone is. I just don't know. I'm literally asking like a fan.
Well, you would think somebody like Arn Anderson, who was in WCW and WWE, could give points.
I don't think Arn knows it. think Arn knows it. All due respect. I'm not talking about
Kevin Sullivan
that's been in the wrestling business forever that knows wrestling stories. I'm talking about somebody that can build an act one. Let's say you've got a 3-month storyline.
Right.
Act 1 is month 1, act 2 is month 2, act 3 is month 3. So you've got 4 weeks of act 1. You've got to establish your characters, put them in an inciting incident. Something's got to happen, an angle or something. that takes that person, that wrestler, on a journey and gets us into Act 2. And each one of those acts has to build throughout that 4-week period. I don't know that there's anybody around Tony that can. There's a million people that could do it, but I don't think it's a former wrestler. And here's why it's hard. And I've tried it, and I've failed at it. When you take somebody that really understands traditional storytelling and what it really means, and then you put them in a wrestling room, it's like a culture war.
Right.
They don't speak the same language.
Right.
You bring somebody in from that really understands writing and sit him down in a room full of people that grew up in the wrestling business, and the wrestling guys are half-ass talking carny most of the time when they're talking about a wrestling story and shooting these angles and all that. Well, you take somebody from the outside, it's like, what the? You're just never going to get on the same page. It's going to take somebody that understands both worlds, and they're out there. Mike Mansouri, who already exists in AEW, he's not the answer by himself, but he's a big, giant chunk of it.
Well, then surround yourself with those type of people. Get a good writer from Hollywood, a good writer from wrestling. You make the final decision, have them send in their drafts, and you fix it as such. You know what I'm saying?
But you got to listen to them, because a lot of times when if you think like a wrestler, most wrestling people that I've ever worked with, either if they came out of a weekly territory, they had been trained to think on a week-to-week basis, a very short-term basis, right? If they worked in a monthly territory, like I kind of came up in, everything was built over a 3 or 4 week window. So they had a tendency to think longer term.
Would Kevin Sullivan be good for that?
I don't know. I don't think so. It's got to be somebody that comes from a traditional storytelling background, not a wrestling storytelling. Kevin Sullivan or Arn Anderson, any of those guys would be good to be in that room, because you got to bridge those two worlds.
Right.
But the discipline and the structure part of that kind of conversation has to have equal weight in that room. Otherwise, the wrestling people just run right over the top of them. I've seen that happen a million times.
Perfect example is that, like, when we talk, I always espouse soap opera storytelling is episodic TV, and that when you watch the end of the Rumble and the pop they got on the chair, a wrestling booker would have just had the beatdown and the bloodline stand tall at the end of the show. But the Hollywood writer element is, well, Jey Uso, like, this is my new friend, and like he walks out. Like that, like the wrestling people would have just booked, okay, that now the blood, we beat the guy down. But the Hollywood story element, like why it's such a great story is, well, he walks out. So now we have the soap opera element as, this is over, but the soap opera question is, what's going on with Jey Uso?
Now remember, from the beginning.
Right, they literally have come off of the hottest angles ever, and now they still have compelling television going forward.
And you know what?
It's so great,
You want to know what my gut tells me is the reason for that? Why are we seeing this great storytelling now, but it didn't exist 6 months ago? This is way more compelling, and I'm talking about just the level.
Maybe because Triple H isn't as hands on as Vince was, where he was always sticking his hand into everything and changing stuff.
Yes, but I think it's broader. I think it's more than that.
Right.
I think because I've worked with some of the writing staff that are still there.
Right.
And some of them are still what I consider pretty good friends. There are some very talented people on that writing staff that have been in WWE now for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So, but these people that have come from out of a traditional storytelling background, but now have been around the product long enough and know the nuances of it and the audience, that they can form that perfect merger, right? The reason it hasn't happened in the past is because you had one guy that was kind of, it just all depended on what kind of a mood he was in on that particular day. Right?
Right. Yeah.
And when you do that, you basically neutralize the good storytelling components. If you're constantly changing your mind and skipping over important parts of a formula, you're going to have a disaster on your hands. Whereas I think what's happening now with Triple H in charge, this is what I hope is happening, is that Triple H recognized that. He saw how detrimental it was to conduct business the way they did before. I think what you're seeing now is a bunch of really talented people who have been there for a long time. Now you're going to start seeing their talents as it relates to the stories they're telling. That's what I hope.
Yeah, and the thing that you learn Eric, is that you can't and you don't have to and you shouldn't micromanage great talent. The guy's a good writer. Let him do his job. You know what I'm saying? But if he have to worry about you changing everything, or he spent the whole week writing, and then the day of you're going to change it. Because I've had people send me promos from. Oh, and here's another thing. When you were talking about the bloodline, one of the things that makes it so popular is genuine dialogue. Because before, bro, they used to have some whack dialogue in WWE. Probably because the writers were nerds or whatever. I don't know what the case was, But now the
dialogue. You want to know what the case was? I'll tell you. I was there. I watched it happen in front of me too many times. Right. You have a writer that would write great dialogue because the writer gets to know the talent, and they bounce ideas back and forth. So the writer's cool. Writer's got no problem. But the writer also knows that the writer, he or she, is going to have to sit in front of Vince and turn that script in. Now you've got a guy who does not think like the talent, who does not have the talent's voice, who doesn't really know that side of the talent, right, is going to tell the talent how you should say this, how you should deliver this promo. Right. It's not the writer, dude. Trust me.
So they want I believe you 1,000%, But so that's what's good, that Triple H is in charge right now. It doesn't seem like he's micromanaging talent. That talent's really happy and they want to work for him. And you're seeing the results. They're doing really good business and really good storylines.
I'm so excited. I just hope that, like I said, man, I hope WWE realizes what a great job they've done and will spend just as much time trying to analyze how to repeat the process. Because the formula remains the same. Every story you get excited about watching on television, whether it's streaming or whatever, if you're watching it, if it's a movie, there is a formula to that story, and the formula is almost always identical across every movie.
Yeah. Eric, I know from listening to you and reading your books and stuff that you're a big believer in that, whether it's, the ABC points of a story or writing a character Bible or a series Bible. This is kind of a nerd in the weeds question, but what books have you read, like screenwriting or otherwise, that you would recommend to people that are into creative writing and novels and screenplays and stuff?
The one that really, it kicked me in the head like a mule. It just hit me so hard. It was called The Hero's Journey. Uh-huh. Because that book, more than anything else that I've read, was the first time I read anything about story structure in literature and the different types of stories, because not every story is the same. But did it in a way that I was able to go, here's how I apply this format, this roadmap. Here's how I apply that roadmap to this particular journey. Now, it's not a perfect fit, but if you know enough, if you just believe in the formula and you learn and you know enough about the wrestling business that you can modify that formula, but then believe in it and stick to it, refine it as you go. You're always going to be making it better, just like directors and writers strive to make everything better. But man, if you don't have a formula, what you're really doing is just throwing crap up against the wall and hoping it sticks. Hero's Journey is one. The other one is called, I think, 7 Basic Scripts is the other one. Because that takes you back to the beginning of storytelling time when cavemen were sitting around with a charcoal stick, drawing pictures of the hunt and carving it in the rock,
Right.
Telling a story with stone carvings. And it's been around forever. And when you understand the art in this, you can't understand the art of it if you can't understand the structure of it. Mm-hmm. You can't play a song on a guitar if you don't know the chords.
Yeah, you got to start at the beginning.
And that's a perfect way of looking at it.
Cool.